Audiophiles, you're all wrong. So I made a video titled, "If you can't hear this, then you're not an audiophile." Believe it or not, this is my most watched video ever, and it's made me a shed load of money. Well, my green screen and lights are almost paid for. I've linked the video in the description, and if you haven't watched it, then you probably should. Otherwise, this video won't make much sense. Or you can just watch this video. I'll recap the main points. The point of my earlier video was that I'd heard an orchestral recording on the radio, and there was what I considered to be a huge fault. It was so obvious that surely anyone could hear it. So I thought that audiophiles, with their ultra-resolving systems and exceptionally acute hearing, would surely be able to hear and identify this problem immediately. Now, this is where I made a mistake, which I appreciate now from many of the more than 3,000 comments I've received. Audiophiles aren't interested in defects in the recording. As far as they're concerned, the recording that they receive, whether vinyl, radio, streaming or whatever the source, is perfect. This was confirmed in a quote by Gilad Tiefenbrunn of Linn Products, makers of the famous Linn sound deck. I can't remember the source of the quote, but the idea was that even if the vinyl or whatever you're playing isn't perfect, then it should be regarded as such because it's the best you're going to get. He went on to say that following that, hi-fi shouldn't get in the way. I totally get this. An audiophile, no matter how sophisticated or well-equipped, can't do anything about the original recording. And it's worth noting that some great performances exist only in rather mediocre sound. So, where I went wrong was in asking audiophiles to identify a problem in a recording. And of course, they couldn't because it isn't relevant to them. They might like or dislike the recording, and if they dislike it, they won't play it. But it isn't within the realm of audiophilia because it can't be cured by better or more expensive equipment, nor even by an acoustically treated listening room, which I will address in a future video. So, although an audiophile can and will hear what I hear, they will either just like it or just dislike it. They won't analyse it any further because it isn't their interest. At this point, I need to play the clip so that you, audiophile or not, can hear the problem. And you will hear it. Well, maybe you won't. A lot of commenters didn't hear anything because they were listening in mono on their phones, or while cycling with one earbud, or, and I might allow this, sitting at a distance from their speakers in a room with bare plaster walls. That will obscure the issue. To hear clearly what I hear as a problem, you will need to be listening on hi-fi loudspeakers, not Logitech's, fairly close to, in reasonable acoustics, sitting halfway in between. You know, like an audiophile would. Or you can listen on decent quality headphones or earbuds. You will definitely hear the issue. Oh, and this is clearly audible despite YouTube's audio data compression. You're listening to Roland Hendricks playing a clip from his album The Clarinet as Prima Donna, Carl Maria von Weber's Clarinet Concerto No. 2. Link in the description. Here we go. Did you hear anything? Well, let me tell you what you heard. You heard a solo clarinet dancing around the stereo image like a demented frog with a substance abuse problem. Listen again. Now, judging from the more than 3,000 comments I've received, and I have tried to read them all, nearly everyone who can hear the issue says it isn't a problem. And many say that they like it. Well, you're all wrong. Well, you're not wrong because of the principles of de gustibus non est disputandum, chacun à son goût, and each to their own. If you like it, then you like it, and there's nothing I can do about that. You're still wrong, though, and here's why. As in mathematics, I'm going to start with an axiom.
An axiom, postulate, or assumption is a statement that is taken to be true, to serve as a premise or starting point for further reasoning and arguments.
Here it is.
A recording of classical music should attempt to replicate the concert hall experience in the listening room.
Yes, I know. I could have started with a different axiom, and I will come to that later, although it would be a topic for its own, quite detailed video. Here I'm considering that a recording should emulate the concert hall experience in the listening room. So what is the concert hall experience? Well, there's an orchestra on stage, a soloist out front, a conductor to keep everyone in line, all playing music written 200 years ago. Musical purists might suggest that the instruments should be exactly the same as they would have been 200 years ago, and players should not use vibrato. That's a school of thought in itself, but for my purpose, we don't need to go that far. Let's take a look at Roland Hendrix in concert. It's the same composer, Weber, but a different piece. I couldn't find a video of the same clip as I used in a concert. What we hear in this clip is a little over-reverberant for my taste, but I want to concentrate on the specifics of this issue, the demented frog issue. What you can see in the video is that Roland moves his clarinet a lot, side to side, up and down, a little bit backwards and forwards too, as he bends and leans. No problem, this is part of the expressive process, and it would be rather dull if he was as still as a statue. Also notice that he doesn't move his feet much. Some soloists range over a much wider area than this. Kim Bomsori, whom I saw recently playing violin, ranged over, I'd say, a circle of diameter more than a metre, all of which is fine in performance. Now the question is, how much of this movement should the recording engineer want or attempt to capture? There are two sensible answers, none of it or all of it. Okay, something in between would be sensible too. In the live performance, you'll notice that the soloist has been given one mic. In the clip I'm considering, he has three, although apparently only the lower two were used. A single mic will capture none of the movement. There will be slight variations in tone and perhaps level, but hardly noticeable to the ear. The overall orchestra miking may capture some of the movement, and you may be able to hear this. Listen closely on your finest headphones. What I hear is some variation in the reverberation from the room, but hardly any, if any, movement in the clarinet itself. This is somewhat subjective, so you may hear it differently. Now let's compare this again with the problem clip. In this, if I were to try and imagine the movement of the clarinetist, he would be from moment to moment 80% to the left of the stage, 80% to the right, or anywhere at any time in between. And this can vary from note to note. This is something that couldn't possibly happen in real life, not even if the performer was swinging from a trapeze. This, to me, and according to my axiom, cannot be anything other than wrong. So what's the right amount of movement? Well, I go to concerts and I know that I hear very little movement in the soloist, even from very close to the stage. I'll go back to Kim Bomsori because this was in my mind when I went. How much movement would I hear? Well, she moves a lot. And as I said, as well as swaying, bending, leaning, she moves bodily backwards and forwards, side to side over an area a metre or more across. Could I hear this from my position in the second row? You know, I wanted to hear it, but I wasn't all that sure that I could. My eyes were telling me there was movement, but I couldn't be absolutely sure I could hear it. What I could most definitely hear is that as she moved, the angle of the instrument presented itself differently. Sometimes the front of the instrument, the belly, was square on. Sometimes the instrument was side on. Sometimes I saw more of the back of the instrument than anything else. And this made a very clearly audible difference in sound. But movement, really not so much. I tried closing my eyes to concentrate on whether I was hearing movement, but being a promenade concert, I was standing and I could feel myself swaying a bit, so I didn't do too much of that. What I will say, though, is that any movement that I heard corresponded with what I saw, and I didn't see the soloist lurching from one side of the stage to the other, and certainly not at random, note by note. So, axiomatically speaking, this recording of clarinet is wrong. But even though it's wrong, people like it, and again, de gustibus non est disputandum. Where does this take us? Well, for most things in life, if we like it, we want more of it. And seeing as the vast majority of my commenters like this unnatural movement, perhaps this should become a thing in classical music recording. So the aim will be not to capture the movement of a soloist minimally or accurately, but to emphasise the movement, make it wider and more random, and with Dolby Atmos, give the movement height and make it spin around the room. Personally, I can't think of anything more dreadful. But if this is what the market wants, recording engineers and producers should probably give them more of it. They'll be doing something that can't be found in so many recordings of the past. They'll sell more records, more streams, and become rich and fat on their profits. What would good old Carl Maria von Weber think through his time telescope from 200-odd years ago? It wouldn't be like anything he'd ever heard, so surely he'd hate it. Yes, he'd hate it, so this is why people like me say it shouldn't be done. The thing is, though, that the composers of the past who are remembered and performed today were innovators. They added something to the musical experience that no one had done before. Weber's innovatory credits include what is considered to be the first German opera, Der Freischütz, The Marksman. He developed the leitmotif further than anyone had yet done. He had the performer of his concertina for horn and orchestra produce two notes at once by humming while playing. To him, he'd probably listen to this jumping clarinet and consider it a great idea, and then develop it some more. My axiom:
A recording of classical music should attempt to replicate the concert hall experience in the listening room.
I said I'd come back to it. I'm going to cover this in more detail in a future video. But what if there's another way? What about this? A bit wordy, but maybe commenters can condense it down a little.
A recording of classical music can never fully replicate the concert experience. It should therefore provide an experience that is as entertaining as possible in the listening room, providing an experience in the listening room that a concert can never replicate.
So how about that then? Suggestions in the comments. You're still all wrong. See you soon.